playing football, one, kept me occupied. Two, it helped me to develop relationships with a team. You know, especially when you're young, you got to understand how you can work with other people, work with other kids. So I think that they were helping me along that way, and football was that thing to allow me to show me, being responsible. You're part of a team. People depending on you. You got to be there. You got to do your thing. So.
We're back with one more down. Today we have Miles Davidson, offensive and defensive lineman out of South High School, class of 1987, the Mighty Warriors of Market Street. This brother was one of the dominant figures in my youth. Always heard his name through my sisters and around town, just hearing his exploits on the field. But I got to see in person as a young man, just how dynamic he was as a athlete, as a community leader, and just a all around good guy that represented any time that you seen him out and about. So it's a pleasure for me to get the chance to spend some time with him today and get to talk to him about his days at South High, how he took his football playing experience to the next level, and then catch up with him on what's going on in his life and how post-athletic life has treated him, and, just get a little deeper look into the man, Miles Davidson. So I'm glad to have you on today, brother.
I am elated and glad to be here. I've heard your podcast, your show several times, and listened to guys that I played with and played against, and now I finally got the chance to tell my story.
I'm glad that I get to be the person to hear it firsthand. With that being said, I understand that you are a East Side guy that transitioned to the South Side. So
Yes,
if you would like to, could you start with, those early days of who Miles Davidson is and, the foundation that he comes from?
Okay. Well, Miles Jamal Davidson, Betty of Embro, and son of Betty and Embro Davidson. Look at me. I grew up was born and grew up on the Sharon line in the 70s. Running around with a lot of guys on the Sharon line and the east side. And, just little fat, pudgy kid just trying to make his way through life and all. And, enjoyed my time on the Sharon line. I always tell my people I split between the Sharon line and the South Side. I love them both. I said, but my heart is Eastway Terrace, down there on the Sharon line off McGuffey and Jacobs, and going to the McGuffey Center. Running around up and down Jacobs, and then going to Bailey Pool in the summers, and playing basketball and stuff. So I was an early Sharon liner, and then just growing up, playing that little side street football. We always got teams together, and we would play the Lincoln Knolls or the Victory or Plaza View, and meet up and just play. And we was out there trying to kill each other. So I'm glad I survived that. Because Youngstown folks, they want to come like Jack Tatum, knock you clear on your behind. So just coming up, and then around the summer of '82, had moved over there to the south side. I was actually just on a street called Woodford. I mean, just down the street from my door park. We could see the Jackrabbit from my house, and whenever the ballroom would have concerts or that polka and stuff, we heard it loud and clear and everything. So, and from that point, when I started, when I was still on the Sharon line, living on the east side, they bused us over to west side, Vaughny, and my friend Kevin Brown. He was playing for Vaughny Rogers, and he said, "Man, you ought to come out, man. You better than these cats out here." I said, I got a little task to do. I ain't want to be too much. You get out there, and first time you put on pads, you lay somebody out. You like, okay, I can deal with this, right? you know. So played my first organized team I ever played with was Vaughny Rogers. Like I said, the next year, summer of '82, I moved over to the South Side, and sure enough, I'm right there close to Cleveland School. Got in there and went out for Princeton, and that's where I met all my homeboys, Kev, Delbert, Dre Bally, Turner, Darren Turner, all the cats that, just took me in. Benji Park, I'm just trying to remember names. We all played Vince Morrow, um, Aldrich Jones, all them. We all played together at Princeton that one year. And just trying to find my way because, living on the east side, my grandmother stayed on the south side. But, the south side always had, in my mind, south side always had this little undertone, this little rough over here. You got to be careful, and then, so I'm like, okay, well, shit, I live over on the Sharon line. I got to worry about them. I'm going about my business. Then I moved to the south side. I'm like, ooh, I got wonder what's going on. But the people
So,
always accepted me, loved me from the day one. I was out there practicing for Princeton and playing and stuff. And I learned how to deal with, deal with being on the South Side, folks who cool, who wasn't, and stuff like that. So yeah, it was, coming up in those young days, you know, people that I played with, people I played against, you know, that was some of the early things, because when we eventually get to high school and stuff. But yeah, that was me, it was a great rough and tumble player, and kids out there doing our thing and just having fun.
when you go back in your memories and you think about what your household was like, are you able to give some description of how you were brought up and what was expected of you from your mom's rules and regulations?
Oh yeah. Well, it was just my mom and my sister. My father And my mother, I guess, divorced or separated, when I was just a child. So it was essentially my mother, my sister, and I, and, we were very tight knit group, and I had a mother that loved me. Shoot, I had a mother that spoiled me. And I had a sister that, she's an older sister. She's 10 years older than me. So, you got to pick on the little brother. And, we had our things and fight, but we were very close knit family. Um, and the thing that, I wanted to make sure with my mom that she didn't have to worry about anything with me because she worked for the federal government, and I wouldn't have known it back then, but they say we were poor, but I never felt poverty because we had things. We would get things the way we had to do. My mom, I mean, I never missed a meal. I mean, I guess I can attest to it. Never missed a meal. We never had to be evicted or anything like that. But I knew my mom worked hard, and she sacrificed a lot, a lot of things that she could have been doing with me and then my sister and stuff. And, we had a bond that was close. Two of my biggest cheerleaders, by far, for any player, any kid, parents are going to be there, your siblings going to be there. But, you know, I I didn't know a whole lot, and I thought I did when you was young. You think, as you get a certain age, oh, I got it figured out, and I didn't. And I was a little bit of a kid that would, maybe bully or had little issues with anger. And I did until my mom had to come to school and straighten me out. And she did it because she loved me. Because you let a kid just do what they want, then they don't have any discipline, and then they think everything's expected of them. My mom made sure of it. And I would see my father. When my father lived in Detroit growing up, so I would go to Detroit summers, maybe for a holiday or something, and all. But no disrespect to my father. And my dad was a professional boxer. This man knew Joe Louis. And matter of fact, I can give you a quick little nugget. My dad was a boxer, professional boxer for 8 years. He fought out of Detroit, but he's originally from Ohio. Well, actually, East St. Louis, Illinois. So when he got into the boxing game, you wouldn't believe the person who was managing my father for his career, and he never, and he never really expressed it much, but he told us he was oh boy, I'm about to do Jimmy Hoffa. Jimmy Hoffa was his manager. And I'm like, Pops, you know who Jimmy Hoffa is? My pops he would just go like this. He would never say nothing. Never said all he ever told us that he knew who Jimmy Hoffa, he knew Jimmy Hoffa. So years later, I come across a book that was written by Bobby Kennedy called The Enemy, I think The Enemy Within. In fact, I have it upstairs. And my father is listed in there by name because my dad, uh, Bobby Kennedy, found my dad and was questioning him, because my dad was boxing. He boxed all day. Hoffa had him as some like food inspector. And I'm a probably wasn't no food inspector. So Bobby got in there and he talked about it. My father confessed, yeah, Hoffa was paying me under the table, 50, $75 a week, and back in the 50s, boy, that's money. So he he eventually Kennedy had these things. Well, there was a thing called the Magellan Senate Subcommittee, and that was to study corruption in boxing. Hoffa, if you know history, Bobby Kennedy and Hoffa did not like each other. They went at it, and so my dad was actually called to testify before that committee. And my father sat in there ready to prepare to give his testimony. And right before they started, Jimmy Hoffa showed up, sat in the gallery. And this is in the book. So they start the testimony. And whenever there was a question, Hoffa did not want my father to answer. He would go like, you can hear him. My father clammed up. So basically, he didn't say anything. After the hearing, Bobby Kennedy bring my father back to his office and said, well, what's up, man? You told me the whole thing, what went down, and, what happened with your testimony. He said, man, did you see that little man back there? He said, if I said one word about him or anything he done, I'd be floating in the river tomorrow. And so he popped out. And a lot of people, I tell people, like, when I go to little conferences and stuff, and they ask you little things about, I tell them about that. And I always told my dad before he had passed, I said, Dad, you know how much of a part of history you is? But he would never really acknowledge it, you know. And I think it was just something that he didn't want us to know as a family. But, I got fights at him. He fought Archie Moore.
So when you bring up a man such as your father, who would be from that silent generation, we're talking about Teamsters, blue collar jobs, a lot of steel mill cities, a big bustling town like Detroit in the 1950s. There's a whole lot going on through that era. From your interactions and the time that you were able to spend with him, his background and what he may have seen as a man finding his way through his career, how do you think that filtered over into his style of parenting you and preparing you for young manhood?
Well, even though uh, my father, I didn't grow up with my dad. When I would visit him, he was, not no taskmaster, but shoot, for a person being on vacation, I had to make sure you get the laundry done, cut the grass and stuff like that. But he was teaching me a lot of responsibility. Um, he worked. He was an electrician for Chrysler for almost 30 years. So, him getting up early and, going to work, coming home, providing, by this time he remarried and had, she has children and stuff. So I see him doing the day in, day out stuff and the work hard, but he also, played hard too. My father played jazz. He blew trumpet, and had a xylophone. So he also played hard too, get a little drink and sip and be gone. So it just, you know, it was for me with my mom, my father, but particularly my mom. I wanted to be a good representation of them, because growing up, I mean, there were so many avenues a young kid can go to get into drugs or, stealing, fencing stuff and everything. But I wanted to stay straight and narrow because I wanted them to, if anything, be proud of me, and say, hey, my son is this, my son is that, or you're not dealing with, because I had family members that were in and out of jail, and, I've seen how it put the pressure on a lot of my aunts and stuff like that. So I said, this is not what I want to do. So, playing football, one, kept me occupied. Two, it helped me to develop relationships with a team, you know. Especially when you're young, you got to understand how you can work with other people, work with other kids. So I think that, they were helping me along that way. And football was that thing to allow me to show me, being responsible. You're part of a team, people depending on you. You got to be there. You got to do your thing. So, Yeah, they were there. You know, even though they weren't together, they were very heavily influential on how I saw things.
When I look at that film that I showed you at the beginning there, you know, we're talking about the mid 1980s, City Series football. Youngstown is still pretty good in terms of population, and there's a little slide from the glory days in terms of what it was in its heyday, but
Right.
still a lot of great people, a lot of great families, a lot of great athletes.
Exactly.
So what stands out to me is just to see you in your prime and in your youth for a guy of your size during that day, the quickness that you had, the speed that you had, that desire and that tenacity that you show chasing down a guy returning a kick. Here
Mhm.
you are, a 6'3" offensive defensive lineman that's giving full maximal effort in making a play for your team. What is that something that's just innate in you as a person, or is that something that was developed through your experience and your climb and your familiarity with that game of football?
Well, it definitely had a lot of butt kicking to do. Coaches, getting on you, pushing you, hustle. You always got to hustle. That was our thing at South when we played. Especially when we had defensive practices, we would do flow drills and stuff. And then they'll always talk about hustle, get to the ball. We want 11 hats to the ball. So it trying to build that tenacity in me to, hey, get off that block, run, get this running back, and hold that tradition. South had that tradition of tough defenses and stuff. So I think with how my parents influenced me, you got to earn your keep. My mom told me, you'll never be a liability. Earn your keep. She would always tell me, you can go over and spend the night, even like over my cousin's house or a friend's house, for their graciousness. You get up, see a dirty dish or two, wash it up for them. You know, trash need to be taken out. Nobody got to it, take it out. And those were the things that she instilled in me because I think seeing a young black man and coming up in the world is tough, you know. And I think she wanted to make sure her only son was all right. And I tried to reassure her, as much as she would think that I may fly off somewhere. I said, no, Mom, I'm good. You taught me well. But yeah, just the things that we did like at South, I mean, the things that we practiced, the way we practiced, I think was all part of that, because you want to do the best you can.
You come through there in a time where Coach Demesko is receiving the reins, and then you're part of that foundation of guys that really elevated him in his coaching as a head coach.
Right.
1986, which is your senior football season, your class of '87. You guys have an outstanding season of 9-3. You make the playoffs and advance around into that, and then the guys that you played with during your time at South, some of those guys are just some of the more memorable guys in that school's history when it comes to football. Who are some of the standouts of people that you either uh, watched when you're first coming in there, or the guys that you may have played with that you felt I'm playing for this guy and he's playing for me? Is
Oh,
there anybody that you can identify to that effect?
well, Ron, that boy, I mean that spans back to when I was young, watching Ohio State football, and I'll tell you one, actually two people, and just lucky to find out watching where they were from Youngstown. First was Garcia Lane. I'm watching him against Oklahoma and Marcus Dupree, and playing with Sean Gale and uh, can't remember Crusados and stuff like that. And I said, oh, that's South High. The other was Brian Morrow. played at Wisconsin. And those were the things that, you know, seeing that it's a sense of pride. Cause A, you know who they are. Two, they're actually representing the city of Youngstown. And and the business of football, and everything that comes around it. So watching that in the beginning, when I didn't actually start. When I got to South, I didn't actually wasn't there for my freshman year. I actually went to Mount Calvary because Mount Calvary's putting the team together, and Coach Pegues, shout out to him. He recently passed. He was very good at big influence. Coach Will Drayton, very big influence on me, and I watched. They showed me a lot of that, but what I saw in the South, like Lou Gilbert, Teddy O, um, Steve, Tony Harris, Gary Thornton. Those are the guys because I was a freshman, and even though I didn't play, those guys I looked up to. So by spring of my freshman year, '84, going to the spring of '84, I transferred from Mount Calvary to South. So now I'm in the whole mix. And, I saw players, like Steve, Keith Saunders. That dude, man, I just like, bro, I just wanted to try and emulate what he did and how he did things. And I love the fact that by the time I got to OU, he was at Toledo. We were playing against each other. Man called me out during pregame warm-ups. I'm like, what you doing? But seeing them, Rat, George, I can't get George's last name, but Drac, Brian Ford, man, it's just so many, Boo Boo and Butt, Harold Darrell Dabney, Delma Stubbs, man, Kenny Boone. Kenny Boone played tight end my sophomore year, and those guys, they weren't like, oh, you got to do this, but you looked up to them and saw how they did things and the pride they wore for the red and blue. So that kind of gave me, as I came through, I wanted to show, because, like I said, I'm coming from the sharing line. I ain't never homegrown. I want to show them this is where I belong. And that's why I wore number 79. Because when I got in the South, you go through the weightlifting and the summer conditioning. When it got down to getting those numbers, I wanted something that was going to be a connection. And I always remember in Demesko's office, he had that plaque of the 1979 South High Warrior team, 10-0. And you could see the score. They were just ripping people. And I said, 79. And I said, I'm going to wear that. And I went through there, they had a little bag, little cart, 79. This is it. This is it. I said, because this now, I got something tied into it. And I wore that. I tried to wear it with pride. I tried to play as hard as I could. When you're young in high school, here, do good, you may take a playoff, and I did that. But when it came time to play, I was ready to play. And that, seeing those guys, even, dudes that I played against, like Timmy Rudd, and Kenny Poindexter, my man Montel Short, he was center. We grew up together. But it's almost like you in a room of players, and you want to make sure people see and recognize who you are. So you go out and do the best you can.
You bring up some great names. You started it off with two of the best for, our lifetime, Brian Merrill, All City split in. Garcia, Booby Lane, the do-it-all quarterback. He was actually the first back to go over 1,000 yards at the school.
Oh,
And then he
really?
went on and represented it, like you said. I remember, those USFL days and the Kansas City Chief days. And,
Yeah.
Like you alluded to earlier, there's something about seeing someone from your hometown doing things with a high level of excellence that makes you want to get a little piece of that. For yourself, you finish on a high note at South. You were named the Defensive Player of the Year for the City Series, winning the Mike Deniro Award.
Yes, sir.
Me being a Cheney alumni, I know how important
Yeah.
that legacy is. And,
Yeah.
I actually got to see film of him when he was at Texas A&M,
Oh,
and he
really?
was everything that everybody ever said about him. And you could watch that and see it stand out on film.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for him, he lost his life at a young
Yeah.
age.
Yeah.
But when you look through the schedule that you guys play in '86, you guys are doing things that hadn't been done at that school up to that point. 1979, we're talking about an era of playoffs where the top two in each region makes it, and a 10-0 South team can't get into the state playoffs.
Right.
When you think back through that season, and as you see some of these schools and scores scroll across the screen here, what are those standout moments and memories from that '86 season for you?
I tell you what, um, I knew that year was going to be special when we opened up at Erie McDowell. And then the very first play, Larry Davis would tell you, the very first play, I don't know what happened. I didn't see it because, I'm trying. All I seen, I look up and Larry Davis is running down with the ball going into the end zone. Very first play. I said, this is going to be different. This is going to be different. I just felt that, and we took out McDowell pretty evenly. Just some plays by guys that, when we first started, if I can recollect, I think we then played Erie Tech at home. And I remember Bally taking about a 99-yard quarterback keeper for the score. Teely had a big interception, took it to the house. We could see that we had the talent. You can feel it. Some teams you just know. I'm sure like back in the '70s when the Steelers were very good, they knew. They knew. They played with each other. They played games. You kind of knew. It's just an aura that you have, and that was the aura that we had. And going into the season, I think it may have been the very next game or not. We played Wintersville. We got hosed up there a little bit. And it was actually my fault because I think Tony Tunnington went in and scored. And all I was doing, the dude I was playing against, he was a mouthy dude. And all I did was, I got you. And ref right there. Whoop. And we lose 7-6. So I had to eat that one. But as we went on, and then when and I always tell this when I talk to anybody, old player, that sophomore class that we had, Tanron, McClendon, I know I'm going to miss some names, but Stone, those were the young cats. Blue, I remember Blue would have us running all over excuse my French, damn practice. I mean, Blue is Blue, and coach get mad. You can't tackle this guy. You go tackle the guy in the game. He ain't as fast as this dude. And Blue, they were guys. He played kick return. He was kick and punt returner. But those guys were very integral because they filled in gaps when we needed. We had a senior, Eddie Gibbs. We used to call Eddie Mr. Utility Man because he coached Claret, Mike Claret. rest in peace to Coach, he would put Eddie in little situations where he can be effective, and when you keep going, then you finally get in a city play, and then we went toe to toe with Cheney. I know senior year we beat Rand. I think it was 12-10. All I can remember that game was Derek Lewis ran an 80-yard thing on us right up the middle. I said, I've never seen a big man move that fast. I'm not going to tackle him. So with that, and then, Wilson, and then East. But, in the middle, we had a couple games. We went to Sharon. We laid it on them. And that day, I think Taron was sick as a dog, and he went off. And, we were just we were really finding that stride. We knew, and we had great coaches, Demesko, obviously, Mike Claret, Coach McDonald. He was the offensive guru. He would do some stuff that, I'm seeing a lot of these teams do today now, and he was just an innovator, and we had got so much momentum, and then we get to that Camp McKinley game, and we would, we've been to Camp McKinley before, and, got up there, they rolled over us, and it looked like it was going to happen again, because they get the kickoff, and Ron, 1, 2, 3, touchdown. We get it. We 3 and out. Punt it in. 1, 2, 3. All strong 4. This dude lining up for a 40-yard some field goal. He ain't gonna make it. Boom, straight through. 10-0. And I think that what changed that game for us, it was one play where Tamron got the pitch and he was going towards the sideline. And the dude from Camp McKinley drove him out of bounds. We drove him on our sidelines. And we was like, oh, hell no. I don't care what y'all may be McKinley, but you ain't going to come over here and do no stuff. And that very next play, that's why I always want to watch these films, man. That's why I want to. Very next play, we gave a pitch to Tony Tullington. Tony actually was running perpendicular to the field, running towards the sideline. Hit that corner and sprinted all the way. I don't know how long it was. Had to be at least 40 to 50 yards. And just like that, it gave us a shot of confidence that we can play with them. And another thing that was very, I didn't know about until after the game. McKinley, they had a lot of guys. So they had a lot of one-way play. We were doing two-way. But come the fourth quarter, that's where Tamron made his bones and Tony made his bones. Tamron did more in that second half. He scored 2 touchdowns. We were gassed. By the fourth quarter, we were gassing them. Boom, 10 yards, 12, 20, and Tam, you just can't hit Tam with one person. Even as a sophomore, he gonna slide off you and be gone. We wore them out. So, big victory. Everybody loved us and stuff. We went to Wilson. We almost laid the egg there. I think, too much of the big head. Played East that first game. And this is why I say I love City Series football. I'll always be a cherisher in my heart. That was City Championship. And you talk about the 2 best teams, 2 ranked teams in their region going for a championship. And as much, we talk about football and hard-hitting, to me, that was a beautiful experience. It went back and forth, nip and tuck, and we lost. We lost. And that was probably the sickest feeling I had. But I told them guys, hey, the way the computers go about, we're going to have to play them again. So we got, let them have their championship. Oh, and they did. They drove around in our neighborhood and stuff. So we got to be ready for next week. And that next week, went out there, got a good lead. They came back with Dre Ballinger run like a 60-yard touchdown, and we won. And those are the things that, when you think about things in football, that's the beautiful part of it. You played against some good people, you played against some great competition, and it was fun. And you had a good time, and it was just a beautiful thing.
When you say that, I've witnessed other matchups like that. The '97 Cheney team had to play a '97 East in within a 3 week span. I can think of the 1991 season. Ursuline and Mooney, I believe, had to go back to back, just like you and East did. But
Yeah.
for those of us that have played in the city league, records aside, we know that there you get up for those games because you're seeing your friends or you're seeing a guy that you may have competed against or with, all the way up through high school, and you want to give your best because you don't want to be known in the neighborhood as the scrub. Heaven forbid someone say you played sorry. So that effort and that desire to be on top, I can understand and relate to what you're saying 100%. When you match that up against the backdrop of a great season, which it was, as you're capping that after the loss to North Canton Hoover, what are your thoughts and what are you looking to next at that point?
Wow. At that point, I was looking like, with everything that happened, the playoffs, um, I was all Northeastern Ohio. I was obviously all city. I was defensive MVP. For the part of my whole, probably it wasn't didn't happen to my senior year actually. I didn't think about going to college, and the only reason I thought about going to school and going beyond was because they were going to offer me a scholarship. Because as simple as it was, when I went on these recruiting trips, I always would ask coaches, "What? Did my mama have to pay anything?" No, no, we're gonna give you full ride, full scholarship. Okay, no problem. As long as she ain't gotta pay, I'm good. And I saw that, but it was a surreal moment for me because now I'm entering into another level, the next level, and I'm you talking about guys that I'm watching on TV. I'm gonna be on the field with them, because my freshman year we opened up at West Virginia. And I'm like, shoot, I just remember what just last year they played Penn State, you know. So it's kind of like, wow, I'm actually here. So when it gets down to it, I was looking forward to it, but it was more of a opportunity for me to get a college education and to get a degree. For all that was worth what I thought it was back then. I got a degree, I'll be set. And little did we know, it ain't just a piece of paper, you know. So, but I was thinking this would be, again, I wanted to make sure my parents were proud of me. I didn't want to be a burden to them. I wanted them to be proud. I would just daydream, when I was playing. My mom would say, "Yeah, my son's playing guard for Ohio Bobcats and everything," and da 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 da. That way she wasn't. She had a son that was doing stuff. He wasn't mixed up in no things. We know people from the Yo. We love them all. You got some folks that really didn't look to do anything other than to be on the slide with stuff. And I'm not to judge anybody, but I just said I wanted a little bit more than that. So I thought with going to OU, this would be my opportunity to showcase it. I could play, I could go to school, because they tell you going to college, man, you're gonna read 4 or 5 books in a week and shit like that and stuff. So it I was looking forward to it, and I was ready to embellish it, and I was ready to try and prove myself all over again.
When you leave the confines of what has been your youth experience, and now you're on the other side of that, and you're looked at as an adult because you're 18.
Mhm.
But it's a new experience. It's new things to learn. There's another level to rise to in those situations. When you're going into that environment, you come in with some really good guys, a lot of guys from our area.
Mhm.
We spoke the other night and spoke of Anthony Thornton, who was the quarterback there during that time.
Yes.
You relayed to me that David Height out of East was already there, and then
Yes.
Dev Culliver joined you down there as well. What was it about that experience? From the football standpoint for you, but also from the social and the growth and the development part. What did Ohio University afford you in those areas and in those boxes?
Oh, it really gave me the opportunity to grow as a man. And I'll say that unequivocally because now I my support system is me. Okay, yeah, we can call back home, Mom, how you doing? But if there's an immediate issue, I gotta deal with it. And that's what I wanted. As much as I thought uh, looked at schools. I was recruited. I visited Michigan State, University of Louisville, um, and those were schools that be partial to you. I really wanted to go to Michigan State, but the coach was real honest with me and stuff. So I looked at OU and said, well, it's not that far from home. It's far enough that they can't reach out to me. They got to drive at least a couple hours. I said, I won't. They won't have to travel that far to come see me play. And that's why I wanted to go to Michigan State because my dad really never seen me play. So you know, being down, being on your own, going to class, taking care, doing the things, I was gung ho. Because I wasn't the best student. I really shaped myself up going into my senior year to be eligible to play. They still had to take the ACT or the SAT, and you had to have a certain score. So I had to pull my GPA up just so I can, get a reasonable score for the ACT. Shoot, I remember when we took it, I was there with Kenny Poindexter. We partied the night before. We go there, this thing, I'm struggling. I come out, I see Kenny months later. He's like, I said, Kenny, what'd you get? Oh, I got 27. I'm like, bro, I just got an 11. Ooh wee. I'm like, I'm struggling. But that was the thing I had to do. I knew it's almost like when you play the video games, you go from one level to the next, but there's always a little something there. You got to get this right. You got to get your grade. I was just really trying to shape myself up for that. So going down to OU, being myself, and then playing football, and then being, they wanted me to start. They actually, I thought I was being recruited as a defensive tackle because MVP and everything. And then by the time I got there at camp, our coach was like, "Well, man, we moved you to offense." I'm like, "I didn't play offense. I played defense." He's like, "No, we need you on offense." And he told me, he said, "Look, we get after people. Hey, if after so many practices so long, if you don't like it and want to move, we'll let you go." And he was true to his word. As offensive line, we played, we got after people. And he said, "I like your feet." And that was another thing. My dad was a boxer. He had very good feet. And I always wanted to, I had blessed feet. I had a coach stop a drill. I had the head coach stop a drill on me. We Youngstown. We go through tires and stuff. That ain't nothing to us. I'm going through the rope drill. Hey, he blow the whistle. Look, Davidson, get back over there. Do that again. I'm going through. He said, I want to curse. Gosh darn, I ain't never seen feet on linemen like that. Man, you got some good. I'm like, We do this. I'm like, we do this every day. At South, you coming for summer practices, at the rope or the tire, run the steps and stuff. Nothing. I'm over here. I'm thinking I'm Big Willie from Philly up in this. But they want me to play, so you had the pressure going to class, maintaining your grades, and then you starting. You got to do your due diligence. Prepare. I had a coach that was great. We did these things called walkthroughs. We never did when I was in high school, and he would just run through all the plays. And I told him, I said, I learned better like that. See, if you put a notebook in front of me, no, I need to see it. I need to see how it go. And we would run through the play. I mean, in rapid time too, because he will always keep you going. I don't want you thinking. I want you doing and stuff. So yeah, it gave me some of those principles that I needed to get through life. Sticking. Being responsible, doing your job. Going to class. Doing things, football wise and stuff. And just being out there where, you couldn't call mom and dad. I really looked for it. I really looked for it like that.
When you are leaving high school on such a high note with winning being the upward trajectory, and then you go through an experience where the winning tapers off, but you still have to grind your way through and show up and be accountable. Is there any metaphor in that experience of playing through that era of Ohio University football that you would accentuate as the positive?
For me, and I don't want anybody to get confused. I hate losing. I hate losing anything. But for me, it was all about being accountable. Okay? Because when I came in there as a freshman, playing early, we played, we always would play, unless we were on the road, we played our home games at 1:00 in the afternoon. And I can say with the 4 years I was there with pride, when it was time to play, I was ready. I felt I was the most prepared I could be. I would do things to, psych myself up before games. I'm a big P-Funk. I love P-Funk. So I've got it in my ear getting ready. I'm head bobbing. And some of these guys, what's wrong with him? I'm getting ready. And the thing is, when I'm listening to that music, I'm going through scenarios in my mind. How I'm going to step against this guy, make sure I get to that shoulder. When we double off to the backer, I want to make sure I can get that, pin that shoulder and get his shoulders to swing. Things like that. And the funk helped me with that because it got me in that mood. It got that energy going. So, it for the time, because just so everybody know, in 4 years I was at OU, we only won 7 games. But that's 7 games of my life. And I loved it. And, even though we didn't win, I was out there to play. I wanted to show people in the stands, on the sidelines, whoever was watching, this kid came out here to play. Now, I'm offensive lineman. I ain't scoring no touchdowns. I ain't throwing no touchdowns. But I'm going to go out there and play the best I can against whoever and contribute and do the best I can to help my team win, And that's what kept me motivated. I didn't, people said, well, why didn't you go pro? At that time, I really looked at it, but at the same time, my dad always told me. He said, when that thing inside you isn't there anymore, let it go. You can always, you know that you've done your best. And towards the end of that year, I was like, I just didn't have that to want to study, to want to prepare. Not knowing, plus I had knee injury and stuff. not as an excuse. I just felt, I got the best I did. I got the most out of it. I got a degree. I played college ball, played against some great competition. I met some good people, and I've got friends for life, and that's the way, aside from getting a multi-million-dollar contract, and I understand people like, well, man, you got opportunity. You know, nothing's always given. But I knew, like I said, it always came back. Being that representative, make sure my mother and father were proud, that they can see my son is a good man. He did these things and stuff. So, you know, I enjoyed it. I loved it. Like I said, I met some great people, and it just, for all the lack of winning, uh, you know, I had a good time playing.
You know, I relate to you, seeing you in a different light as a, a youth leader and an advocate for the Panda program through high school. You stated that you had some really great internship opportunities and experience with the Ohio General Assembly.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about, that transition into the workforce, and then are you able to make any connections or relate that to your experience as an athlete and your time as a advocate and a youth leader during your younger days?
Okay. Yeah. I actually had got an internship through the state of Ohio. Um, it's called the Legislative Service Commission. They actually do all the drafting of bills for the state politicians and stuff. So I started there summer '91, July 2nd, 1991, and was working through it. I actually got my degree in communication. I actually wanted to do what you're doing, producing and stuff like that. But I got so enamored with state politics, I didn't want to be a politician. I just, I was like I was mentioning before, my goal was to try to be like a chief of staff or to run a particular agency and stuff. And actually, I went back to school, pursued my master's in administration for it. Because I said, I love the responsibility of getting things organized, organizing people, and trying to achieve that goal. So that was just something that I really got drawn to, and I really wanted to excel. Fortunately, with some illness issues, I didn't realize what I wanted to, but I did have a very good career. I'm uh, 34 years of state service. Actually, today is my last day. I'm retiring, so I'd had a very good professional life. So I can't sneeze at that. I can't be mad at it because I've seen some things, done some things that I was blessed to think. But just having that discipline and understanding, being able to work with people, being able to address problems, and find solutions. That's why I really, wanted to involve myself in doing. It helped me. I did start out when I got to the EPA as a public information specialist, but I didn't like that too much because people were hollering at me at the meetings. Whenever the agency, I worked for the Ohio EPA, by the way. Whenever the agency would want to pass a permit, they go out and get public comments. Some people don't, let alone deal with state agencies, don't want anything happening in their backyard. So I said, after a while, I don't like this. So I went back to grad school and stuff, came out, got into administrative work for the EPA and our DER, emergency response, and our central district office. I basically was a lifer at EPA. They treated me very well. But it was being able to use those things that I learned in life on the football field were very helpful to me because it allowed me, sometimes you got to be able to deal with certain people and personalities, or you got things where you got to make sure you get the right person on there to get the best performance. And that helped me a lot, because I was captain my senior year at OU, for whatever that's worth. But it helped me develop those skills and stuff, and that's something I always take away with sports, because whenever you deal with sports, like any other thing, football, you deal with momentum. Things can go your way one moment and then go against you. When they're going your way, you roll like a steamroller. When they're not going your way, you got to learn how to be disciplined and keep working until you can move that momentum back and get things going the way you want. So it was very beneficial for me.
The theme of our show is one more down. We come to that moment where, we ask this philosophical question of if you had that one more down to recreate, redo in your lifetime, it doesn't have to necessarily be on the gridiron, but just a moment of reflection in terms of what you would do over in the life of Miles Davidson. If you had that one more down to repeat again, what would that be for you? Where would that be at, and who would be with you as you're doing it?
If I had to do it over again, I would have stayed in school longer. After my 4 years at OU, I would have tried to find a grad program, and I wouldn't have got married when I shouldn't have. And, because trying to do some things, trying to settle down, but trying to go to school, that was a little tough, But if I had to do it again, I said, you know what? I got A, B, and C to do. When I get to C, then I'll start considering this thing here or that thing there. But I, should have done a lot more to take care of myself. But you live and you learn. That's the whole embodiment of wisdom. It's not the pat on the back that you learn from. It's the kick in the butt. That's where you start to understand, well, what happened? Why did this happen? Where did I go wrong? And being, taking a very honest self-assessment on things. A lot of things I could have done better. A lot of things I could have done more. But when you take that self-respect, you introspect of yourself, look and be honest with yourself. Okay, hey, but there's always a new day, so you got another opportunity to do right. So you find out, where your shortcomings are, you work on them, and you try to be better and do better.
To have a guy like you come on and express yourself and, give that extra peek into who you are as a athlete, as a man, and as a deep thinker. We talked a little bit about that affinity that you have for P-Funk music, and you've always been a guy that enjoyed a good time, but you have that serious side of yourself that shows and is reflected in the course of a long committed career through your work. You're in a different phase of your life in terms of, taking care of yourself and thinking about what this latter version of Miles Davidson is going to be. For me, to have the ability to reflect back in my own mind and see you as that fleet-footed 6'3", 250-pound guy chasing people, yet have the articulation to steer kids in the right direction, and then having a long reflective look back at who you were as a young guy, and then the finished polished version of who you are as a elder statesman in this era. I think it's great that people who display character and pursue avenues of positivity, good things happen to you in the end.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And it may take a long time coming around, but when you walk in truth, you walk in wisdom, you walk in light, you don't have to worry about anything. There's no excuses to be made. You do what you everything. And that, I appreciate you mentioning that, and I'm glad that you're doing things like this to kind of archive a lot of the guys that played back then and what they're doing now and stuff. And like I said, I played in the Youngstown City Series football from '84 to '86, and I'm very proud of that. I'll tell you, second to none. And it was part of my thing that helped me be the person I am today. And I'm glad that you saw me as an older person and you looked up to me, because that was the same thing I was doing when watching them, when I was a freshman, or like I said, seeing Bobby on TV and Brian Morrow and Dwayne and all them, like Vince Morrow now, we these are things that, hey, I was part of that. And I got my accolades. I got a championship and an MVP. I'm good. So, when they had them little talks about this and that, who is this, that, and the other, and they do it all the time on those, man, I don't say nothing. I just enjoy it. And just hear people, like with that 79 team, Garcia Lane and Morrow. Heard a gentleman by the name of Richard Rotan, and another one that went to Arizona State. His name escapes me. But, those are people I'm like, I look up in awe and say, man, and you look at pictures of them when they were high school, and them brothers look big, they look ornery. You think it's, you look at yourself in high school, ooh, I was small. So it was great to see that, like I said, sitting in front of the TV, and then when we were playing, going especially my senior, going to the field house after this game on Friday night and donuts and orange juice and watch the film, and do your little lift and get on out. I had to get home because Ohio State play at 3:30. So it's all part of that nucleus of things, and I'm happy that I'm able to share some of this with you, and I think you're doing a great job. Your people, man, keep doing this, and we gotta look out for each other. Now I'm retired, I'm looking to do some things more in the community and all, so we can bring up them next. Cause I got friends that are doing things now, because I worked and, medical issues I wasn't able to, but, now I got a little freer time. I'm gonna give back a little bit more, but I appreciate you having me on today.
It was my pleasure. I wish I shared the experience of knowing what it's like to lose a city game, but I don't have that experience to share.
And hold on to it. Cherish it for